The amber liquid caught the light, trapping it like a prehistoric insect in its viscous depths. Shaw rotated the glass, watching the glow of Zadric Station's garish neon signs filter through the drink. This was his last bottle of Vichy amber, worth more than most patrons of the Hollow Point bar made in a month. Shaw had no business wasting it here, in this dingy corner of the frontier station where the air recyclers fought a losing battle against the mingled stenches of unwashed bodies, spilled drinks, and cheap synth tobacco. But the Skylark needed repairs before she'd make another run, and Shaw needed something to dull the edge while he waited. "A man who drinks alone has secrets," came a slurred voice to his left. Shaw didn't bother looking up. "A man who drinks alone wants to keep them that way." A heavy thud announced the arrival of his unwanted companion at the booth. Shaw sighed and finally raised his eyes. The Dervicky was massive even for his species, towering nearly 7 feet with mottled orange skin that looked like badly cured leather. His 4 nostrils flared unevenly with each labored breath, and the smell of fermented krill wafted across the table. Shaw wrinkled his nose. "What do you want?" The Dervaki's mouth split in what might have been a smile or a grimace. "Trade. Good trade." "I'm not in the market." Shaw took another sip, savoring the warm spice that spread across his tongue. The Vichy was the last of his luxury items, saved for emergencies or exceptionally bad days. Today qualified as both. "Not buying, selling." The Derviky's bulbous eyes flicked toward the bar's entrance, where a bouncer with mechanical arms was ejecting a patron. "Need to liquidate assets." "I'm not interested in stolen goods," Shaw said flatly. The Skylark's hold was already too full with questionably acquired artwork from the Centauri galleries. One more customs flag, and he'd lose his ship. "Not stolen." The alien leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial rumble. "Cultural grade. Highest quality." Shaw frowned. Cultural grade was smuggler's slang for living contraband. People, essentially. The term turned his stomach. He'd run freight that wasn't strictly legal, but he drew the line at trafficking. "We're done here." Shaw stood, but the Derviky's massive hand clamped around his wrist. "Look first, then decide." The alien nodded toward a darkened alcove near the restrooms. Shaw was about to wrench his arm away when he saw them. 2 slender figures with luminescent blue skin, so alike they could only be twins. They stood perfectly still, heads bowed, wearing simple gray shifts that did little to hide their willowy forms. Diary, a species known for their empathic abilities and grace, rarely seen outside their home system. "What the hell?" Shaw hissed, jerking his arm free. "You can't just—" "Can—" The Derviky shrugged his massive shoulders. Need to offload before customs sweep. Diary fetch high price in inner systems. Very decorative." He leered. "Or so they say." Shaw felt something cold settle in his chest. "Those are people, not cargo." "People, cargo, semantics." The alien waved a dismissive hand. "I need quick sale. You have good drink. Fair trade." "You want to trade 2 sentient beings for a drink?" Shaw couldn't keep the disgust from his voice. The Derviky leaned closer, the smell of him almost overpowering. "Not just any drink. That drink." His eyes fixed hungrily on the amber liquid. "Vichy amber. Last tasted on Homeworld. Before." He trailed off, something like grief flickering across his alien features. Shaw looked at the twins again. They hadn't moved, but he could see them trembling slightly. Their skin, which should have been vibrantly blue, looked dull and ashen under the bar's harsh lights. How long had they been in this bastard's possession? What had they endured? "What happens if you can't sell them?" Shaw asked quietly. The Derviky's expression hardened. "Jettison before customs. No evidence." Shaw's fingers tightened around his glass. "You'd space them?" A careless shrug. "Business." Shaw took a deep breath, fighting the impulse to drive his fist into the Derveki's face. It wouldn't help. The alien outweighed him by at least 200 pounds. And a bar fight would only attract station security, which wouldn't end well for anyone. The full glass, the Derveki said, his eyes never leaving the amber liquid. Not a sip missing. Shaw looked at his drink, then at the twins. It wasn't a choice. Deal. The transaction took less than a minute. The Derveki practically snatched the glass, cradling it reverently before downing half in one swallow. His eyes closed in rapture, and for a moment, Shaw could almost see someone else beneath the cruel exterior, someone remembering a lost home, a better time. Almost. Paperwork. The Derveki fished a grimy data chip from his pocket and slid it across the table. Transfer of ownership. Legal in 14 systems. A pause. Not this one. Shaw pocketed the chip without looking at it. Get out of my sight. The Derveki drained the remaining amber and sighed with deep satisfaction. Pleasure doing business. He lurched to his feet and pushed through the crowd toward the exit, still clutching the empty glass like a treasure. Shaw approached the twins cautiously. Up close, he could see subtle differences between them. The one on the left stood slightly taller, her posture rigid with tension. The other hunched her shoulders, eyes fixed on the floor. My name is Shaw, he said quietly. I have a ship. It's not much, but it's safer than here. Will you come with me? Neither looked up, but the taller one gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Good. Follow me, and try not to draw attention. Shaw led them through the crowded bar, keenly aware of the stares following the blue-skinned twins. Diary were rare enough to attract notice, especially on a backwater station like Zadrik's. He kept his pace casual, but purposeful, projecting the confidence of a man conducting perfectly legitimate business. The station corridors were quieter, the night cycle dimming the lights to a dull orange glow. Shaw's hand strayed to the stunner concealed under his jacket. If they encountered a security patrol. But luck was with them. They reached Docking Bay 17 without incident, where the Skylark waited like a faithful old dog. Shaw's ship was neither sleek nor impressive, a Farron-class light freighter that had seen better decades. Patches of mismatched hull plating gave her a patchwork appearance, but her engines were sound and her stealth systems were top-notch. More importantly, she was home. Welcome to the Skylark, Shaw said as the airlock hissed open. Watch your step. The twins followed him silently into the cramped cargo hold. Crates of artwork lined the walls, each piece carefully wrapped and secured for transport. Shaw bypassed these and led the way to the upper deck, where the living quarters were. It's not much, he said, keying open the small galley. But it's clean, and it's safe. The taller twin finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. Why did you do this? Shaw paused, caught off guard by the question. Do what? Purchase us. Her gaze was direct now, unnervingly so. What do you want in return? I didn't purchase you, Shaw said, more sharply than he intended. And I don't want anything. That data chip is going out the airlock as soon as we clear the station. The twins exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. My name is Nera, the taller one said. This is my sister, Tali. Tali raised her eyes briefly, then looked away again. Shaw noticed a thin scar running along her jawline, disappearing beneath the collar of her shift. Are you hungry? He asked, suddenly uncomfortable. I've got food. It's nothing special, just protein packs and hydrated noodles, but we haven't eaten in 2 days, Nera said simply. Shaw felt a surge of anger toward the Derveki. Right, food first, then we'll talk. While the noodles rehydrated, Shaw gave them a quick tour of the ship. The Skylark wasn't built for passengers, just a cockpit, galley, cargo hold, engine room, and Shaw's small quarters. You can have my bunk, he said. I'll sleep in the cockpit. The chair reclines. We won't take your bed, Nera said firmly. There are emergency cots in storage, Shaw offered. We can set them up in the galley. By the time they returned, the noodles were ready. Shaw portioned them into 3 bowls and added flavor packs, real spices, not synthetic. Another luxury he rarely indulged in. They ate in silence, the twins with measured, careful bites despite their hunger. Trained behavior, Shaw realized. His appetite faded. How long were you with that Dervicky? He asked, when the silence became unbearable. 3 station cycles, Nera answered. Before that, a Toran merchant. Before that, she shrugged. We were taken from our home during the expansion. We were 12. Cultural-grade hostages. Tali spoke for the first time, her voice softer than her sister's, with a slight rasp. Decorative acquisitions. Shaw set down his bowl. I'm sorry. Nera's expression remained impassive. What will you do with us? I'm not going to do anything with you. You're not cargo. Shaw ran a hand through his dark hair. Look, I've got a run to make to Pelios. It's a good system, strong labor laws, decent settlement assistance for refugees. I can drop you there. You'd be safe. They all say that, Tali murmured. Safety, freedom, pretty lies. Shaw couldn't blame her for her skepticism. I understand why you wouldn't trust me, but I swear on my ship. I mean you no harm. I'll get you to Pelios, help you get settled, and then, he spread his hands, you'll be free to go wherever you want. And if we wanted to leave now, Nera challenged. Where would you go? Shaw asked gently. Back to the station? With no credits? No documents? The sisters exchanged another look. We'll go to Pelios, Nera decided. For now. Shaw nodded. Good. We leave in 8 hours. Try to get some rest. He set up the emergency cots in the galley, provided them with clean clothes from his own sparse wardrobe, and showed them the tiny sanitization unit that served as a shower. Then he retreated to the cockpit, ostensibly to prepare for departure. In reality, he needed space to think. What had he gotten himself into? He was a smuggler, not a rescuer. He worked alone for a reason. Getting involved was dangerous, especially with people who would be missed. If that Dervicky had stolen them from someone powerful. Shaw shook his head. Done was done. He'd get them to Pelios, make sure they were safe, and then go back to his solitary existence. Simple. The ship's computer chimed with an incoming message. Shaw frowned and checked the sender. Anson, Terminal 5. A contact he used for information, but rarely at this hour. The message was brief. Customs sweep delayed. Diary registry flag active. Proceed with caution. Shaw cursed under his breath. Someone was looking for the twins, and they'd flagged the system. It could be legitimate diary authorities trying to recover their citizens, or it could be whoever had paid for them in the first place. Either way, leaving Zadrix just got more complicated. Shaw initiated the ship's startup sequence and began plotting alternate routes. They'd have to avoid the main transit corridors, stick to the commercial lanes where traffic was heavier and scans less thorough. A soft sound made him turn. Tali stood in the cockpit doorway, watching him with large, luminous eyes. Can't sleep? Shaw asked. She shook her head. Want to watch me work? I'm just plotting our course. Tali hesitated, then slipped into the co-pilot seat. She studied the navigation display with obvious interest. You understand star charts? Shaw asked, surprised. I was to be a navigator, she said quietly. Before. Shaw nodded, not pressing for details. What do you think of this route? He highlighted his planned course. Tali studied it, then pointed to a section near the Keller Belt. Heavy patrol presence. Resource protection. You're right. Shaw adjusted the course. Thanks. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Tali occasionally suggesting minor adjustments. Her knowledge was impressive, if somewhat outdated. Your sister seems very protective of you, Shaw observed. Tali's fingers traced a constellation on the display. Nera is strong. She kept us alive. A pause. I was broken for a while. The scar on her jaw. The rasp in her voice. Shaw didn't want to imagine what had caused either. You seem pretty strong to me, he said. Tali gave him a look of such naked vulnerability that he had to glance away. No one had looked at Shaw with anything but wariness or calculation in a very long time. We should complete pre-flight checks, he said, suddenly businesslike. Can you monitor the fuel mixture while I run diagnostics? Tali nodded, apparently grateful for the task. She proved to be a quick study, anticipating Shaw's needs before he voiced them. By the time dawn cycle brightened the station's external lights, they had a flight plan, and all systems were go. Nera appeared, looking rested despite the uncomfortable accommodations. She raised an eyebrow at her sister, in the co-pilot's seat. Tali's been helping, Shaw explained. She's got a navigator's eye. We're leaving early, Nera observed, noting the pre-flight sequence in progress. Shaw debated how much to tell them, then decided on the truth. Someone's looking for you. There's a registry flag for diary. We need to move before they lock down outbound traffic. Nera's face hardened. Who? I don't know. Could be legitimate authorities. Could be whoever the Dervaki stole you from. The syndicate, Tali whispered, her earlier confidence evaporating. They found us. What syndicate? Shaw asked. Luxury acquisitions, Nera said bitterly. They supply cultural artifacts to collectors. Living art. Shaw felt sick. All the more reason to get moving. Strap in, both of you. Departure might get interesting. Interesting was an understatement. Halfway through their departure sequence, Zadric's control flagged them for routine inspection. Shaw fed them a looped system readout that showed the Skylark's hold filled with agricultural supplies while they slipped past the inspection zone. It wasn't until they hit open space that Shaw allowed himself to relax. We're clear, for now. They won't stop looking, Nera said. We're valuable property. You're not property, Shaw said firmly, and we've got a head start. But Nera was right. They were barely 6 hours out when the proximity alert blared. A patrol vessel was closing fast, broadcasting identification demands. Scans show they're armed, Shaw muttered, checking the readout. Skylark, increase speed to maximum. That will strain the port engine coupling, Tali said from the co-pilot seat, where she'd remained for most of the journey. Better strained than captured. Shaw punched in the acceleration sequence. Nera, there's an emergency kit under the galley sink. Bring it here. The Skylark lurched forward, the damaged coupling groaning in protest. The patrol ship stayed with them, gaining slowly. They're faster, Tali observed calmly. But we're sneakier. Shaw flashed her a grin. Passing through that dust cloud ahead will give us cover to deploy countermeasures. The dust cloud was a debris field from an old mining operation, perfect for their needs. As they entered it, Shaw activated the ship's electronic countermeasures, a custom setup that scrambled their signature, replacing it with the profile of a much larger vessel. Cutting engines, he announced. We'll drift while they chase the ghost. For tense minutes, they floated silently through the debris, watching as the patrol ship pursued the false signal deeper into the field. Clever, Nera said, watching the patrol ship's trajectory on the scanner. Won't fool them for long, Shaw replied. But it buys us time. They changed course twice more before Shaw felt safe enough to resume their original heading. By then, the port engine coupling was making ominous sounds. We need to stop for repairs, he admitted. There's a way station in the Kirill system. No questions asked. Cash only. It was a risk, but less of one than continuing with a failing engine. The sisters seemed to understand this, offering no objections as Shaw altered their course. Waystation Echo 7 was little more than a refueling depot attached to an asteroid, but it had repair facilities and, crucially, no direct ties to either the diary authorities or the Inner System Syndicate. Stay with the ship, Shaw instructed as they docked. I'll arrange the repairs and get supplies. Nera crossed her arms. We're not helpless. I know that, but diary would be remembered. I'm forgettable. It was true. Shaw cultivated a deliberately unmemorable appearance. Average height. Brown hair kept short. Clothes that were neither expensive nor shabby. The perfect smuggler's camouflage. I'll be back in 2 hours, he promised. Seal the ship behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. And only after I give the passcode. Skylark singing. The repairs took longer than expected. The coupling was more damaged than Shaw had realized. While he waited, he browsed the station's small market, picking up fresh food, medical supplies, and clothes that might fit the twins better than his own. He was examining a selection of dried fruits when he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. The blue-skinned twins. Valuable merchandise. Reward is substantial. Shaw didn't turn around, keeping his expression neutral as he continued examining the fruit. Haven't seen any diary, said the vendor. Pretty sure I'd remember that. How substantial we talking? 50,000 credits for information leading to recovery. Double that for direct retrieval. 100,000 credits. Shaw could buy a new ship for that. A good one. The thought flashed unbidden through his mind, followed immediately by self-disgust. He paid for his purchases and walked away, resisting the urge to look at whoever was offering the bounty. The repair crew was finishing up when he returned to the docking bay. Shaw paid them, adding a generous tip with the unspoken understanding that they'd forget they ever saw his ship. Skylark singing, he called as he reboarded. Nera opened the inner airlock, relief visible on her face. You're late. Repairs took longer than expected. Shaw set down his purchases. But we're good to go. Where's Tali? Engine room. She insisted on checking their work. Shaw raised an eyebrow. She knows engines too. Tali absorbs knowledge like a sponge, Nera said with a hint of pride. Always has. Shaw hesitated, then said, There's a bounty on you. 100,000 credits. Nera's expression didn't change. Is that why you were late? Deciding whether to collect? The question stung more than it should have. I was late because the coupling was shot to hell. And no, I wasn't tempted. That wasn't entirely true. But the moment of temptation had passed as quickly as it had come. Shaw might be a smuggler, but he wasn't a slaver. And he certainly wasn't the kind of man who would betray two people who had already endured too much betrayal. I got food, he said, changing the subject. Real food, not protein packs, and clothes that might fit better. Nera's posture softened slightly. Thank you. Tali joined them as they were unpacking the supplies. The repairs are adequate, she announced. But the power distribution is uneven. I adjusted it. Shaw stared at her. You adjusted my engine. It needed it. She tilted her head. Are you angry? No, just surprised. Not many people could make sense of that engine. It's a hybrid system. It's logical once you understand the principles. Tali reached into one of the bags and pulled out a package of dried berries, her eyes widening. Are these? Suri berries, yeah. Shaw found himself smiling at her reaction. The vendor said they're from the diary system. I thought you might like a taste of home. Tali opened the package with careful fingers and inhaled deeply. They grow in the southern valleys, she said softly. Our mother had a tree in her garden. She offered the package to her sister. Nera took a berry and closed her eyes as she tasted it, an expression of such profound longing crossing her face that Shaw had to look away. They left Waystation Echo 7 with a repaired engine, full supplies, and a new wariness. The bounty meant they wouldn't be safe until they reached Pelios, and maybe not even then. We should discuss defenses, Nera said as they gathered in the galley that evening. In case we're boarded. Shaw looked up from the stew he was preparing. You've got experience with that? We've been retrieved before, she said flatly. The Toran merchant lost us to the Derviki in a similar manner. I can create lockdown protocols, Tali offered. If you'll allow me access to your ship's systems. Shaw hesitated only briefly. Granted, but I want to know what you're doing. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Shaw piloted the ship. Tali worked on systems, and Nera kept watch, her keen eyes constantly scanning for pursuit. They took meals together, slowly sharing pieces of their lives. Shaw told them about growing up on a mining colony, learning to fly by stealing maintenance shuttles, eventually saving enough to buy the Skylark from a retiring smuggler. He glossed over some of the darker chapters, the jobs that had gone wrong, the people he'd lost. The sisters' story emerged in fragments. They had been born to a diplomat mother and scholar father, raised in privilege until the expansion wars reached their homeworld. Their capture, their separation from family, the training that taught them to be perfect ornaments in a wealthy household, the punishments for infractions, the escape attempts, some successful, most not. How did you end up with the Derviki? Shaw asked one evening. We were being transported to a buyer in the Cygnus sector, Nera explained. The Dervaki was part of the security detail. He saw an opportunity during a fuel stop and took it. Out of the frying pan, Shaw murmured. He was less cruel than most, Tali said quietly. He did not use us, only displayed us to enhance his status. Shaw pushed away his plate, appetite gone. I'm sorry for what was done to you. It wasn't your doing, Nera said. Still, Shaw met her eyes. No one should be treated as property. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, an acknowledgement. For the first time since they'd met, Shaw felt as though Nera was truly seeing him, not just assessing a potential threat or ally. The moment was broken by a proximity alert. Shaw jumped to his feet and rushed to the cockpit, the sisters close behind. Unmarked vessel, he reported, studying the scanner. Coming in fast. Syndicate, Nera said grimly. They use proxy ships for retrieval. Shaw checked their position. We're still 12 hours from Pelios space. No patrols out this far. Can we outrun them? Tali asked, already sliding into the co-pilot's seat. Not a chance. That's a Raptor-class interceptor, fast and mean. Nera leaned over the console. Then we fight. Shaw looked at her in surprise. The Skylark has minimal weapons, just point defense for debris. We don't fight with the ship, Tali said, her voice steady. We fight with our minds. Over the next hour, as the interceptor closed the distance, they prepared. Tali programmed lockdown sequences that would seal sections of the ship if breached. Nera crafted makeshift weapons from tools and kitchen implements. Shaw checked his stunner and the ancient projectile pistol he kept for emergencies. They'll board near the cargo hold, he predicted, studying the ship schematics. It's the weakest point in the hull. I've set proximity charges near the likely breach points, Tali said. Non-lethal, but disorienting. Shaw raised an eyebrow. Where did you learn to make charges? The Toran had a weapons collection. I observed his security chief performing maintenance. Remind me never to underestimate you, Shaw said with grudging admiration. The sisters had changed in the days since leaving Zadrix. Freed from immediate danger, their true personalities had begun to emerge. Nera was strategic, decisive, with a dry wit that surfaced unexpectedly. Tali was quieter, but intensely observant, absorbing information like a sponge and applying it in creative ways. They weren't just survivors, they were formidable. The intercept came at ship's midnight, when most vessels would have a minimal crew awake. The Skylark shuddered as magnetic grapples locked onto the hull. They're here, Shaw said unnecessarily. Remember the plan. If we get separated, regroup at the engine room. They positioned themselves in the corridor leading from the cargo hold, using supply crates as cover. Shaw's heart pounded in his chest. He'd been in fights before, but never defending his ship against professional hunters. The breach was louder than he expected, a controlled explosion that nonetheless sent vibrations through the deck plates. Tali's proximity charges detonated seconds later, and confused shouts echoed from the cargo hold. "Three hostiles," Nera whispered, her empathic abilities giving her account their sensors couldn't provide. "Armed, angry." Shaw nodded grimly. "Remember, they want you alive. They have no such restrictions about me." The first hunter appeared in the corridor doorway, a bulky human male in tactical gear. Shaw fired his stunner, catching the man in the chest. He dropped, convulsing. "One down," Shaw muttered. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Suppressing fire filled the corridor, forcing them behind cover. A canister rolled toward them, hissing as it released gas. "Knockout gas!" Nera gasped, covering her mouth. "We need to move!" They retreated toward the galley, Shaw firing blindly to cover their withdrawal. The gas followed them, an inexorable cloud that made his vision blur. "Seal it off," he ordered Tali, who was already at the control panel. The emergency bulkhead slammed down, cutting off the gas. Shaw blinked rapidly, trying to clear his head. "They'll bypass it soon," Tali warned. "We should—" The ship lurched violently, throwing them against the wall. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency lighting. "They're overriding the systems," Shaw realized. "Tali, can you lock them out?" She was already moving to the nearest access panel. "I need time." "We'll give you time," Nera said, picking up a metal pipe she'd fashioned into a spear. "Shaw, the emergency access tube. We can flank them." It was a desperate plan, but better than waiting to be taken. Shaw pried open the access hatch, and they crawled into the narrow maintenance tube that ran the length of the ship. They emerged near the crew quarters, just as the second hunter, a lean woman with augmented eyes, was passing. Nera struck first, her makeshift spear catching the woman in the side. It wasn't a killing blow, but it drove the hunter to her knees. Shaw followed up with a stunner shot that sent her sprawling. "Two down," he panted. A shot rang out, the projectile whining past Shaw's ear to embed in the wall behind him. The third hunter, another human, this one with obvious military cybernetics, advanced methodically, weapon raised. "Stand down," the hunter ordered. "The diary are syndicate property. This doesn't concern you." "They're not property," Shaw snarled. "And my ship isn't syndicate territory." The hunter's augmented eye glowed as he assessed the situation. "Last chance. Stand aside, or die where you stand." Shaw tensed, preparing to dive for cover, knowing he wouldn't make it in time. The hunter's finger tightened on the trigger. And then Tali was there, emerging from a side corridor. She held nothing more threatening than a data pad, but the hunter swung toward her instantly, recognizing the more valuable target. It was the opening Shaw needed. He lunged forward, tackling the hunter with all his weight. They crashed to the deck, the weapon discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. Shaw grappled for control, but the hunter was stronger, enhanced muscles, giving him an unnatural advantage. A metal pipe crashed down on the hunter's arm, and Shaw heard bones snap. Nera, her face a mask of cold fury, struck again. The hunter howled in pain. Still, he fought, cybernetic fist connecting with Shaw's jaw in a blow that sent him reeling. Shaw tasted blood, felt the world spin. Through blurred vision, he saw the hunter pull a backup weapon, aiming not at him, but at Nera. Shaw didn't think. He threw himself forward, into the line of fire. The projectile caught him in the abdomen, a hot punch that drove the breath from his lungs. Dimly, he heard Tali scream, saw Nera wrench the weapon away and bring the pipe down again and again. Felt hands turning him over, pressing against the wound. "Shaw, stay with us!" Nera's voice, urgent. "Tali, the medbay!" They half-carried, half-dragged him to the small medical alcove. Pain washed over him in waves as they lifted him onto the examination table. "Biofoam," he gasped. "Cabinet. Left side." Tali found the canister of emergency wound sealant, her hands shaking as she applied it. The foam expanded in the wound, stemming the bleeding but doing nothing for the searing pain. "Ship," Shaw managed. "Secure the ship." "I've locked out their access," Tully assured him. "And their vessel is still attached, so they can't call for backup. We're safe for now." Nera checked the wound. "The projectile is still inside. We need to remove it." Shaw closed his eyes. "Not qualified." "I am," Tully said quietly. "The Toran kept a medical library. I studied it." Of course she had. Shaw would have laughed if it wouldn't have hurt so much. "Do it," he whispered. What followed was a blur of pain, punctuated by Tully's soft voice, giving instructions, and Nera's steady hands following them. They used the Skylark's basic medical scanner to locate the projectile, extracted it, using tools Tully improvised from the emergency kit, and sealed the wound with more biofoam and the ship's tissue regenerator. It was crude field surgery, but it worked. By the time they finished, Shaw was pale and sweating, but stable. "Why did you do that?" Nera asked, as she cleaned blood from her hands. "Step in front of the weapon." Shaw's voice was a rasp. "Couldn't let him hurt you." "You barely know us." "Know enough." Shaw tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "What happened to the hunters?" "Secured in the cargo hold," Tully reported. "I've locked it down completely. They won't get out without cutting through the hull." "Their ship?" "Still attached. I disabled their communications array. No one knows they found us." Shaw nodded weakly. "Good. Need to change course. Can't go to Pelios now." "Rest," Nera said firmly. "We'll handle the ship." He wanted to protest, but exhaustion dragged at him. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was the sisters' faces, twin expressions of concern watching over him. Shaw drifted in and out of awareness for what felt like days. Sometimes Tully was there, checking his wound or adjusting the tissue regenerator. Other times it was Nera, spooning broth into his mouth or changing the dressings. They worked in tandem, never leaving him alone for long. When he finally woke fully, clear-headed for the first time since the attack, the first thing he noticed was the change in the engine's hum. The Skylark was moving, but not at full power. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Tully looked up from the datapad she was studying. "You're awake." She set aside the pad and moved to check his vitals. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," Shaw said dryly. "But better. Where are we headed?" "A place called Harper's Moon. It's not on any official charts, but it was in your navigation database, hidden away in a folder marked Contingencies." Shaw blinked in surprise. Harper's Moon was his ultimate fallback, a terraformed moon in an unmarked system, abandoned after a corporate bankruptcy, but still habitable. He'd never actually been there, just kept the coordinates as a last resort. "Good choice," he admitted. "What happened to the hunters?" "We left them at a mining outpost," Nera said, entering the medbay with a steaming mug, minus their weapons and communications devices. "You didn't kill them?" Nera raised an eyebrow. "No, though it was tempting." Shaw accepted the mug, tea, by the smell of it. "How long was I out?" 4 days, Tully said. "The wound was deep and there was infection. We used all the antibiotics in your medical supplies." "You saved my life." Shaw took a sip of the tea. It was good. Some blend he didn't recognize. "You saved ours first," Nera pointed out. It seemed fair to return the favor. There was something different about her, about both of them, a certainty that hadn't been there before. They moved around his ship with familiarity and confidence. No longer guests, but crew. "Harper's Moon is another 2 days at our current speed," Tully explained. "I've reduced power to give the engines a rest. They've been running hot since the attack." Shaw nodded. "Smart. How are our supplies?" "Sufficient," Nera said. "We rationed carefully while you were unconscious." The conversation was oddly formal, all of them avoiding the obvious questions. Why Harper's Moon instead of Pelios? What would happen when they arrived? What came next? Shaw set down the mug. "You could have taken the ship," he said bluntly. "Left me behind, headed anywhere." The sisters exchanged one of their silent looks. "Yes," Nara agreed. "We could have." "Why didn't you?" Tali looked at him with those luminous eyes. "Because you offered us a choice." Such a simple answer. Yet it struck Shaw like a physical blow. A choice. Something that had been denied them for so long. "And this is what you choose? Running to some abandoned moon with a half-dead smuggler?" "For now," Nara said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Until we decide otherwise." 2 days later, Harper's moon appeared on their view screen. A small, blue-green crescent against the vastness of space. As they descended through the atmosphere, Shaw marveled at the accuracy of the terraforming. Dense forests covered much of the surface, broken by clear lakes and meandering rivers. The air was breathable, the gravity just slightly less than Earth standard. They landed in a clearing near what the scans showed to be the remains of a settlement, a cluster of prefabricated buildings, most still intact, despite years of abandonment. "Home sweet home," Shaw murmured as they completed the landing sequence. Nara gave him a questioning look. "Is that what this is? Home?" "It could be," Shaw said carefully. "For a while, at least, until the Syndicate forgets about you, or until you decide to go elsewhere." "And you?" Tali asked. "Will you stay?" Shaw hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. His life had always been transient, port to port, job to job. The Skylark was the closest thing to home he'd known in years. "I need to heal," he said finally. "And the ship needs maintenance we can't perform in space. So yes, I'll stay. For now." The settlement had been a research outpost, according to the records Shaw found. The scientists had left in a hurry when the funding dried up, abandoning equipment and supplies that would prove invaluable. Solar panels still functioned, providing power to the main complex. Hydroponics bays stood ready to be reactivated. It was a survivalist's dream. Over the next few weeks, as Shaw's wound healed and his strength returned, they established a routine. Mornings were spent on essential maintenance, repairing systems in both the settlement and the Skylark. Afternoons were devoted to exploration and resource gathering. Evenings were for planning and, increasingly, conversation that had nothing to do with survival. Tali took charge of the hydroponics, coaxing the dormant systems back to life and planting seeds they'd found in storage. Nara mapped the surrounding area, documenting water sources and identifying native fauna. Shaw focused on communications, establishing a perimeter alert system that would warn them of any approaching vessels. They were building something, not just a temporary refuge, but a home. The realization hit Shaw one evening as they sat around a fire outside the main habitat, watching the unfamiliar stars emerge in Harper's moon's violet-tinged sky. Tali was describing her latest hydroponic success, seedlings that had sprouted against all odds, while Nara added details about the soil samples she'd collected to supplement the growing medium. They were making plans for a future here, and somewhere along the way, Shaw had started including himself in those plans. "We should build a proper greenhouse," he found himself saying. "The solar arrays generate more power than we need. We could extend the east wing, add transparent panels. A greenhouse would increase our food variety by at least 30%, Tali agreed enthusiastically. "And provide medicinal herbs." "The forest edge would be ideal," Nara added. "Partial natural shade in the afternoon, but full morning sun." They discussed the project late into the night, sketching plans in the soil with sticks. It was the most animated Shaw had seen the sisters, their faces alive with possibility. Later, as he lay in his bunk in what had become his habitat unit, Shaw tried to remember when he'd last felt this sense of purpose. Not since before the accident that had claimed his first ship and the crew he'd flown with. Not since before he'd decided that working alone was safer, for everyone. Yet here he was, planning a greenhouse with two women who, by all rights, should have been halfway across the galaxy by now. The next morning, they began clearing ground for the foundation. It was physical, satisfying work, and Shaw's newly healed body responded well to the exertion. By midday, they had marked out the perimeter and started assembling the frame using salvaged materials from unused habitat sections. "Shaw!" Nera called from where she was sorting transparent panels. "Come look at this." He joined her, wiping sweat from his brow. She was holding a panel that had been etched with a pattern, a stylized tree with spreading branches. "It's beautiful," he said, tracing the design with his fingertips. "It's a memory tree," Tali explained, setting down the support beam she'd been carrying. "From our homeworld, each branch represents a connection to someone who shaped your life." Shaw studied the intricate pattern. "Did you make this?" Nera shook her head. "It was here, in storage. Someone else's memory. We should incorporate it," Tali suggested, "as the centerpiece of the roof. A borrowed memory, until we create our own." Shaw looked at the sisters, really looked at them. In the weeks since landing on Harper's moon, they had changed. Tali stood straighter, her eyes clear and confident. Nera's perpetual wariness had softened, replaced by a measured calm. Their luminescent skin had regained its vibrant blue hue, no longer dulled by fear and malnutrition. They were healing, just as he was. "I'd like that," Shaw said. "A borrowed memory to start with." As they worked, Shaw found himself telling stories he hadn't shared in years, about his first ship, the friends he'd made and lost, the places he'd seen. In return, the sisters spoke of their homeworld, of family traditions and cultural practices they feared had been lost forever. "There was a ceremony," Nera said as they fitted the memory tree panel into place at the apex of the greenhouse roof. "When a diary comes of age, you plant a seedling and speak your intentions for your life path over it." "We never had our ceremony," Tali added softly. "We were taken before." Shaw looked at the greenhouse, now taking shape around them, at the seedlings waiting to be transplanted. An idea formed. "We could do it here," he suggested. "Create your own ceremony." The sisters exchanged one of their looks, not of doubt this time, but of shared hope. "It wouldn't be traditional," Nera said slowly. "Nothing about our lives has been traditional," Tali pointed out. The greenhouse was completed as Harper's moon's short summer began to wane. They transferred the seedlings from the hydroponics bay, arranging them in rows beneath the memory tree panel, which cast dappled patterns on the ground when the sun shone through it. On the day of the ceremony, Shaw gave the sisters privacy, retreating to the edge of the clearing where he could work on the Skylark's external sensors. But Nera sought him out. "We would like you to witness," she said simply. Shaw followed her to the greenhouse, where Tali waited beside two small pots, each containing a seedling from their supplies, not diary plants, but close enough in appearance. The ceremony was brief, but profound. Each sister spoke over her seedling in their native language, words Shaw couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear from their expressions. Promises, intentions, hope. When they finished, they looked to him expectantly. "Is there more to the ceremony?" he asked, uncertain. "Traditionally, family and friends would add their own wishes," Tali explained. "For the path ahead, family and friends." Shaw's throat tightened unexpectedly. He stepped forward and placed a hand near each seedling, not quite touching them. "I wish you freedom," he said roughly. "Real freedom. Not just from those who would own you, but freedom to choose your own way, to build whatever life you want." Nera's hand covered his, warm and steady. "And what do you wish for yourself, Shaw?" The question caught him off guard. What did he wish for? For years. His only goal had been survival. Keep flying, stay free, stay alone. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then perhaps you should plant a seedling too," Tali suggested. "And discover your intention as you speak it." There was a third pot, he realized, waiting. Shaw had never been one for ceremonies or symbolism, but standing there, in the greenhouse they had built together, beneath the borrowed memory of someone else's connections, he found himself reaching for the pot. The seedling was tiny, fragile-looking yet vibrant with potential. Shaw held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of all the choices that had led him to this moment. The Dervicky, the amber drink, the decision to bring two strangers aboard his ship. "I wish," he began, then paused, searching for words. "I wish to build something that lasts. Not just walls and roofs, but connections. I've been running for so long. Maybe it's time to grow roots instead." He placed the seedling in the prepared space between theirs, forming a triangle. 3 lives intersecting, not through force or transaction, but through choice. "A good intention," Nera said softly. "Growth takes time, and patience. And care," Tali added, gently patting soil around the base of Shaw's seedling. "Daily attention." Shaw looked at the sisters, at Nera's quiet strength, and Tali's resilient spirit. At the home they were building together on this forgotten moon. At the tiny plants that might, with time and tending, grow into something enduring. "I think," he said slowly, "I can manage that." Outside, the sun was setting, painting Harper's Moon sky in shades of amber and violet. In the Skylark's hold, the artwork from the Centauri galleries waited, no longer quite so urgent a delivery. And, in the greenhouse, 3 seedlings stood together beneath a borrowed memory tree, new roots already reaching through the soil toward each other. Not property, not cargo, just 3 people who had chosen each other, creating something that had never existed before. Home.